going to get started. So thank you so much for joining us today, and happy Earth Week and happy Native Plant Month. So this is our Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group's Invasive Plant Management on Rights of Way series. And today we are going to be discussing evaluating native habitat restoration projects on rights of way. So webinar overview. So this is our 5th installation in the Invasive Plants Management on Rights of Way series. And our objectives today are going to be to discuss why native plant diversity is important on rights of way, highlight management and evaluation methods for restoration projects, and then answer audience questions and share case studies from our 2 presenters. Today's hosts are Dr. Ashley Bennett from the Electric Power Research Institute. She's going to be moderating the Q&A and discussion session at the end. Myself, Allison Little from University of Illinois Chicago's Energy Resources Center, and my colleague Caroline Hernandez, also from UIC's Energy Resources Center, who's going to be supporting things behind the scenes. So quick housekeeping items before we get started. So we are requesting that everybody continue to stay muted and keep your video off throughout the presentation. If you are having any technical difficulties, please send a direct message to Caroline Hernandez via the chat function. And then you can submit all other questions and comments that you would like our presenters to address in the Q&A box, and those will get addressed at the end. And then just another reminder that we are recording this presentation, and we will be uploading it and sharing it. You'll be able to find this as well as our previous webinars in this series on the Rights of Way Habitat Working Group's resources library. And I am pleased to introduce today's presenters. So our first presentation is going to be from Dr. Shawn Askew of Virginia Tech. Dr. Shawn Askew, a Mississippi native, has spent over 2 decades shaping the future of turf grass weed science. With a BS and an MS from Mississippi State University and a PhD from North Carolina State University, he now serves as professor and extension specialist at Virginia Tech's School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. Recently honored with Virginia Tech's University Alumni Award for Outstanding Extension, Dr. Askew leads statewide efforts to develop cutting-edge weed control programs for turfgrass, blending science with practical impact. His research has secured over $13 million in funding, mentoring 21 PhD and 8 master graduates into the field. A prolific voice, he's published over 130 peer-reviewed articles and delivered more than 1,400 talks, earning accolades like the Weed Science Society of America's Outstanding Early Career Weed Scientist and a Southern Weed Science Society's Outstanding Young Weed Scientist. As past president of the Northeastern Weed Science Society and current president-elect of the Southern Weed Science Society, his influence spans the discipline. Dr. Askew's lab pioneers sustainable weed control techniques such as lasers, cryogenics, and drones, while leveraging cutting-edge research to understand pollinator foraging and native plant distribution to enhancing roadside turf and green spaces globally. And Dr. Askew is going to be presenting on his research on Virginia's Department of Transportation roadside habitat, which is pictured there. And then our second presentation is going to be from Amy Toohey of the American Electric Power. At AEP, Amy coordinates the environmental permitting, threatened and endangered species, and cultural resources considerations for construction projects. She manages the environmental compliance from planning to post-construction revegetation. She was awarded the AEP Key Contributor Award in 2022 for development of the Native Seed Revegetation Program and the 2021 Technology Transfer Award in Integrated Vegetation Management from EPRI. Prior to working at AEP, Amy was employed by the Ohio Department of Transportation as a district environmental coordinator for many years. At ODOT, she was responsible for coordination of environmental permitting, completion of NEPA documents, and responsible for projects from planning to end of construction. While at ODOT, she was also awarded the Innovation Ohio Award for streamlining a process related to cultural resources, which resulted in significant cost savings. And with that introduction, I am going to hand it over to Dr. Askew for his presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. So I'm happy to be here this early afternoon with you all and share a little bit of the research that we've conducted at Virginia Tech and for the Department of Transportation in Virginia to kind of look at this concept of trying to promote native plants on roadside vegetation. And I may need a screen share or the ability to, there we go. And so the first thing we want to talk about is why do we care about roadside vegetation? And some of the concepts I'll talk about here probably span many different types of industrial vegetation management. But the first reason is infrastructure stability. We manage vegetation to conserve our infrastructure, to stabilize the soil, but it has to be managed by people who know what they're doing because the same vegetation can threaten our infrastructure. The ponding water that you see there in the upper right-hand corner to further erode or degrade the roadbed. It also causes a serious hazard for motorists. So little things like that that most people don't think about is part of vegetation management on roadsides. And that management influences the biodiversity of the plants that we will have in that system. Vegetation, of course, affects motorist safety. It affects, the ability to see wildlife and the amount of wildlife that are attracted to a given system. And so there's a number of different reasons that we manage vegetation due to considerations of the use of that roadway, but there are also opportunities for the management of that vegetation to give us a little bit more, to give us ecosystem services, stormwater management. So these are important components, but these components, of course, have to be recognized as being secondary to the primary objective, which is motorist safety and infrastructure stability. But it's in that arena of ecosystem services and native plant promotion that we're talking about today. Where did it all come from? At least where did most of our major focus on native plants come from? Well, it came from this memorandum on environmentally beneficial landscaping from President Clinton back in the late 90s. So the federal government kind of decreed plants should be used on all federal landscaping and that the federal government should promote state agencies to do the same. And so the Federal Highway Administration has produced numerous guidance documents to that end to help state agencies further promote the use of native plants. And all of this has only strengthened with the heightened interest in recent years. So the project that I'm going to talk to you about today was basically a large plant community assessment for the Virginia DOT, and it had a large number of non-government organization and government collaborators. A number of people were interested in this, from NGOs that are concerned about invasive species to the Department of Environmental Quality and seed analysts and a number of different people. So when we start to think about roadside vegetation and challenges with establishing roadside vegetation, the big concern for VDOT was how can we do a better job at establishing the vegetation? And of course, with the outside pressures, how can we promote native plants? And you have to recognize that it is a unique environment. There are certain stresses from automobiles that are fairly unique to this system, the infrequency of management, but the absolute necessity of that management also causes a particular stress that's going to select for some species over huge mandate to establish plants very quickly. In the case of VDOT, if they don't get establishment within a certain number of days at a certain percentage of green cover, they can get $10,000 fines from DEQ that just start racking up. And so, fast plant establishment usually does not coincide very well with native plants, perennial plants, pollinator serving plants, because most of those are very slow to establish. So it takes an integrated approach to make this work. Probably the reason that I got this, okay, I'm having a hard time advancing the slide there. The reason that I got my grant with VDOT is the argument that I made was that why don't we do a plant community assessment and find, there we go, and find out which plants are self-establishing on your roadways, despite VDOT's best efforts to establish only exotic tall fescue and other exotic species. And so the idea was to canvass the state, find out what plant communities are there, and produce a subset of the most successful native plants, and then explore if there's any commercial opportunities to buy seed or other propagules or ways that we can promote their success on roadsides. For some reason I can't advance there. Yep, yeah, they're moving along now. I guess all 5 of my clicks went at once. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. So what we did is we set up these transects on multiple sites across the state, and we were assessing the plant community in these 5 distinct locations with respect to the paved road bed. So the edge is going to be within about 1 meter of the edge of the pavement. The shoulder is that downward sloping area moving toward the ditch. And then, of course, the ditch is the usually wet environment, the lowest position. And then the back slope is the opposite of the shoulder. It's the upward sloping area leading away from the ditch. And then we have this 5th transect, the distal back slope, which is usually further away than most of the maintenance. Like if they come through with a sprayer, the distal back slope is further, it's not usually being reached by that spray. It doesn't get mowed as frequently. But in our case, the distal back slope was 1/2 the distance from to the shoulder. I'm sorry, to the back slope. And here's one of, this is my postdoc, Clepson Gonsalves, laying out these transects. So we put a paint dot and we measure the distance of each of these transects from the roadbed at every site. And then just imagine an imaginary line that goes parallel to the roadway. And the roadway is the bottom of our image. And then along that imaginary line, which is 10 meters long, we're going to collect 10 different positions of a whole range of different types of data, from soil moisture to compaction, salinity, pH, and as well as 10 different assessments of all plants within a 4-inch diameter circle of a randomly placed rod. Here on the left image, I am assessing the height of and distance to the opposite tree line. And we did the same thing for the tree line, the height of the trees and the distance. And we use that to assess the overall daily light potential at every site. And so there's a lot of the data mining that hasn't even yet been done. My postdoc is over here on the right side of this image collecting soil moisture and temperature data. We produced almost 2,500 soil samples for this study. It was a major endeavor. We did have a number of challenges where we could safely get off the road and where there were plants that we could effectively identify. And sometimes you just had to do what you had to do. But our biggest challenge probably was mowing. Just imagine driving 4 hours to get to a region of the state of Virginia where you need to collect data today, only to find that everything has been mowed in that region. And then you drive another 50 or 60 miles praying for a back road that hasn't been mowed, because we can't identify the plants right after the mowing. You can see the difference in this image of how much more easily it would be to identify the plants right before that mowing event, which is what we typically try to target. But we did see a lot of amazing roadsides in the state of Virginia, a lot of really great plant biodiversity. Virginia is a very diverse state, and we had a great time doing this project. Here's Clepson and myself taking our selfies at each of our milestones. Unfortunately, we did not get to the 500 site milestone. We stopped just short at 490 sites. So we completed 490 sites. There were 49,000 non-plant data points, 67,330 plants identified, which comprised 616 unique species, and a lot of soil samples, 15,000 miles driven. And our MS Excel file that holds this data is 27,000 rows and 600 columns. And we would often get memory limitations on the computer just trying to do simple tasks in Excel. Next slide. There we go. Here's the sites that we visited across the state. You're looking at about a 7.5 to 8 hour drive from one side to the other. It was 15,000 total miles driven. This map is broken into the seven EPA level 3 ecoregions within the state. So like I said, it's a very diverse state in terms of plant biodiversity. And we were very keen to try to distribute our sites uniformly in space and catch adequate number of samples in each of those ecoregions. We also wanted to sample uniformly across season, and so that increased the amount of driving that we had to do, because each season we pretty much had to cover the entire state again. So let's look at a little bit of the data. This is overall vegetative cover. Now, when you're driving down the road at 70 miles per hour, it all looks pretty green and looks like it's pretty nice cover. But in fact, the edge of the roadway, the average coverage in the entire state was 55% vegetative cover. The shoulder, which was the absolute best, was about 75%. So there's a lot of bare ground and open areas, real turf. This is kind of one of the most important bits of data we collected in the entire experiment. This takes all of the plants and all of those locations at all of those transects and ask the question, what is the biodiversity at these sites based on these drivers that I have on the bottom? So the first two are the primary road versus secondary road. And then the five on the right are those distances from the road edge that I discussed earlier. Now, the Shannon Diversity Index is an index that kind of looks at the number of individual species that were assessed and the number of species within that population. And the higher that Shannon Diversity Index, the greater the biodiversity of plants we have at that site. And notice that primary roads had half as much biodiversity compared to secondary roads. There's a huge difference there. And it's mainly driven by reduced management inputs on the secondary roads. So if we just leave these plants alone, more biodiversity, and most of that biodiversity are on auto-establishing native plants. I'll show you that in a moment. The same thing happens when we look at the distance from the road, from the road edge moving out to that distal back slope. Our biodiversity is highest the further away from that road edge. And if you think about it, where do we need a recovery zone for your car? Where do we need line of sight for the motorist? It's closer and closer to the road edge. That's where all the maintenance is, and the biodiversity goes down. It goes back to that tall fescue monoculture that VDOT wants to establish. Now, they didn't get a tall fescue monoculture. There's still a lot of species in there, but certainly the biodiversity is much higher the less management we put in. Here is native versus introduced plants, and we see a similar trend. The road edge is the predominantly introduced species like tall fescue, and that's the red bar. And if we go all the way over to the distal back slope, we actually see that's the first time at which native plants are overtaking, at least in number of individuals encountered, they're overtaking the introduced plants. Now, bear in mind, VDOT is not seeding any native plants. Everything that they put out, species, that's what they're seeding. So these are native plants that are coming in here and doing things themselves, just as I had proposed in the grant proposal. We actually do have a lot of native plant biodiversity in the state, which I think should be celebrated. Here we're looking at a couple of other effects. This is the effect of soil compaction on the left, being the highest on that road edge by far. That's the areas are probably compacted by the Department of Transportation to give a better edge for the motorist to get off. A lot of gravel there. And then lowest in the ditch, where it's always wet, very soft, very muddy. And we see the exact opposite trend for soil volumetric water content, which is on the right. That is lowest on the road edge, where it's very compacted and you don't get a lot of soil infiltration, water infiltration, and it's highest in the wet ditch. Now, those moisture factors should drive plant communities and change the types of plants. And in fact, it did. I won't get into any specific data today, but we did see changes in plant community across those. Here we're looking at pH and salinity, both of which went down the further away from the road bed we get. And the salinity is on the left, and that is the bottom line. and the pH is on the top. Now, one thing I will say, salinity never exceeded about 1/3, or well, never exceeded 1/2 of what would be considered plant phytotoxic for salinity or salt content. Here's a list of the species, the top 20 species that we encounter. And these are the native forage. Some of these are weedy plants like ragweed, ambrosia, oxalis, toxicodendron, which is poison ivy. So some of them are not necessarily desirable plants, but they are native plants. But there are a number of desirable native plants in that list as well, but we don't really have time to get into specifics on those. More interesting probably is the native grasses, andropogon or broom sedge, tridents or purple top, really high players there. Festica rubra, that one's kind of questionable. VDOT does seed fine fescue. Many of those are probably European cultivars, so technically they're introduced, but that plant can go either way. We have native and introduced species. The top 20 most frequently encountered native grasses here. Let me skip this slide because, oh, well, what I want to show here is actually the frequency of encountering of these native plants, and also whether or not seed is available. And I've singled one plant out, tumble windmill grass, showing that the seed can be over $1,000 per pound. Here's some seed cost of some of the better players that we found in the native grasses. Broom sedge up at around $140 per pound. Beaked panic grass, purple top, deer tongue. So among the ones that you can buy, they are considerably more expensive than tall fescue. And so when you look in the literature and try to find out among these plants we're seeing, how many of them are commercially available? Well, not many, at least for the plants that we saw in Virginia. Most of the research that's been done was centered around the prairie region where you have a lot of duck habitat, and we didn't see a lot of commercially available ecotypes. Broom sedge and purple top, just because they got along well with the other vegetation. For a grass, a native grass to introduce, that was my recommendation to the DOT. Here's a great shot showing a bunch of purple top along this roadway. So just to finish up, I've got about 3 or 4 or 5 slides on a different topic, some recent research that we're doing at Virginia Tech. I've got a student looking at trying to protect pollinators by manipulating what they can see and trying to show them where there is or is not pesticide treated in a given area. So trying to manipulate. So this is a flower that was photographed in our lab with a special camera on the right that shows UV and a normal camera on the left. And we've used techniques centered around that to characterize plants based on their UV reflection. This is stuff we can't see without this special camera. And looking at compounds like this optical brightener that alters what bees, for example, will see and drive them away from an area that's going to get treated with an insecticide. We even measured the amount of contact exposure that they had. And when we put deterrents out, like mowing the day of or a herbicide applied 2 days before, you see far fewer bees are being exposed to that. Here's an example. No deterrent on the top. All of those glowing cuvettes was high exposure for a given bee. These are 40 different bees in each image here. With mowing, we had a much smaller subset, and with the pre-treatment with a herbicide, almost no exposure. So if you're going to apply insecticide, that's just a way to go out and put a deterrent and prevent bees from coming to that area and being exposed to the more dangerous insecticide. And so that's those are just a couple of teasers that I wanted to throw out on some of our pollinator serving work. And that wraps up my portion of the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amy Toohey, who is with AEP, and I think she's going to give you a much more practical presentation, talking about hands-on experience in the field, actually establishing native plants after various construction projects. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Shawn. Very interesting. And always good to see good things happening with ODOT or with VDOT roads there. So like Shawn said, I have some information. It's kind of a summary of all the studies we've done at AEP and partnering with, let's see if I can get the slide to move. There we go. In partnering with EPRI and a lot of area stakeholders, a lot of great folks we've been able to work with and have a lot of good information to share. Just a commercial about AEP. We do cover 11 states. It kind of ranges from Virginia all the way to Texas. With that being said, we have a variety of vegetation, topography, and things. So when looking at getting a native seed program going, it took a bunch of us to do the studies and figure out what to plant. Again, one of the things, I had the same thing there, Shawn, too quick on the trigger. One of the things I wanted to bring up is just give you a perspective of when we get done with the transmission line, we do restore the area. And this is just an example. The picture there with all the rocks and clay, that's down in Athens County. And we were discussing different things to do to restore the site. And then over here, the active restoration is part of one of our studies. And one of the contractors I work with a lot is Goodwin Excavating. They are super. They will give me the straight scoop and tell me if I'm going down a rabbit hole and give me a solution. So partnered with them a lot, and that's their crews out here doing some of the reseeding for one of our plots. One of the things with all our studies, just to give you a basis, is the purpose and need of all these. We had to, when we introduced this or started doing this, I introduced this at AEP in 15. We had to make a business case. It was a big change to change out our seed mixes in our stormwater plans, and it affected a lot of business units and the contractor. So we wanted to have the studies to point to and say, hey, this works. It says right here, we did X, Y, and Z. And then also we wanted the long-term goal of a positive impact to reduce O&M costs. And as I said before, we want it to be easy for everybody. There's nothing worse than being told to do something that no one's thought through. Sometimes you get that new form to use and it's like, ugh, and then you end up, nobody does it. And that's not what we wanted to do with the native seed mixes. We wanted people to use it, embrace it, understand it, and then you get longevity. The thing also we wrestled with is what to plant. We do year-round revegetation, constructions year-round. We needed something that was going to be robust and come back every year or allow the native vegetation to pop through. The other thing is the other layer to the onion here is forestry comes in and maintains our lines. We have a lot of compliance with FERC and NERC and FAC3, where the vegetation, we can't have trees obviously getting intertwined in the electrical lines. So we needed to understand better, and this is in the later part of our studies, what happens when we do normal maintenance and we have, a native species planted. This is kind of a listing of all the studies we've done. The first, I thought I put the commercial in for the first test plot I did back in 2015, which I can't believe it's been 10 years ago, but partnered up with Pheasants Forever. Mike Redder came and met with our contractor, and we talked about seeding methods and the area and getting the plot ready, and of course work with our friends at ODNR because it was on their property. At this time, the methods was drill seeding or nothing. If you didn't drill seed, it wasn't going to work. So we drill seeded that one, and it worked. And good robust crop of partridge pea, which is the workhorse of vegetation. The other EPRI studies we did with Dawes Arboretum, we did test plots. I think we had 6 test plots to start. One had pressure from ag, an adjacent ag. Another set of the test plots would have pressure from the wooded vegetation. Again, they were under existing transmission lines. The other study we did was when one of the leaders in our forestry group said, plant big, go big. We want to really test this out. So the vegetation monitor and regional native seed mix, though that study, that covered the bigger part of our representative states in our footprint, Ohio, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. And we'll get more into that later. And the second phase of Dawes Arboretum was when we're going, okay, we know it grows, it's established. Now let's give it some maintenance. And we ended up adding 3 extra plots on disturbance and to see how that responds. And then my favorite, well, I guess I shouldn't say my favorite, but the one that's really had interesting results was our hydroseeding project, and testing out the mixes, and myth busting a little bit on how to make hydroseeding work. I thought I'd run through just a little bit of the study that spanned our footprint. Little anecdotal thing here was we had a cow problem. Cattle got in one of the plots, and kind of, what cows do. But the native vegetation is actually a benefit. It's survived well. This was hydroseeding. We hydroseeded, and I think in the winter. The control plot won first to being greened up first, but in the long run, the test plot and the native vegetation won out for surviving. Some of these pictures, are in the summer, and it does look a little toasted, but it does bounce back. Again, Partridge Pea, the workhorse, and then Black-Eyed Susan. And then the one that's near and dear to my heart is Clear Creek Metro Park. Working with the Metro Park folks was great. They gave us a lot of good stories, things not to do, and we've used their advice, moving forward with different seed mix checks. But this collage of pictures here shows you this is the access road we had in there with the gravel, and then of course pulled out and restored. And the earlier pictures of seeding, this is right after they seeded, what's popping up. And this one, yeah, looks a little toasty, but it does come back. And even though maybe I cheated, it's in the nature preserve, but the volunteer species that came out were wonderful. And this is still a really good site. It's very well visited by a lot of butterflies and bees. Dawes Arboretum, another great place. Worked with them, as you can see on the studies, for years. The first earlier studies, when things were getting established, I put a little nugget there of all of the species that were encountered when we studied the bees and the birds and butterflies. And then one of the observations was had a lot of the bumblebees in the area. And yeah, it's just been great because we started from dirt, and we knew exactly what we planted, when we planted it, and then the different treatments. And this is kind of picture gives you a little bit of a test plots. We split them in half with mowing and not mowing, which I'll talk about later. Okay, the other part of our business case and what was supported by our studies is the different benefits. And a lot of you all know that, it's stability, it improves the quality of the land. We have used drought tolerant species, habitat improvement, and of course, the one thing that was our biggest goal was to have an effective seed mix that didn't cost $1,200 an acre. That making it something that was competitive with fescue and the normal contractors mix was key. And it can be done. Well, that was one of the myths we kept saying. We can't do this. It's $1,500 an acre. And it's like, well, no, we can do something. We can plant better and smarter. So that was one of the things definitely a big thing that came out of the studies. The red arrow is cue the deer. This deer came out when we were out there that day taking pictures. And again, this area does flood a lot. This was hydroseeded, and it just popped up. And of course, there were some other plants that popped up too, but overall, very successful. And again, I like this picture, use this a lot. This is your free MSE wall or your free retaining wall. And this will also help market it to the leadership and the contractor of why it's so important. One of the things we had to keep in mind when we're doing the studies is how do we get this installed? It needs to blend with how the contractors do their work. It's like that form you get that doesn't make any sense, but you have to do it. No, we were going to make this so it makes sense, blends with what they do normally, and is cost effective. So at the end of our studies, we could broadcast it, we drill seeded it, hydroseeded it. Again, everything worked. We had strong performers, and I'm still dealing with today a little bit of a culture change as people get more familiar. Seed composition, this is a big discussion, big debate. And by looking at the 3 or 4 studies and all the reports, I've pulled out maybe some generalities that maybe would be maybe are helpful to you, but things that, you know, are supported in our studies. The balance of the 60-40, 45, my math is, well, it's close, 99. Looking at that, because as you know, as things evolve, things get to more grasses and we want to, you know, keep the forbs going. But again, later on, you'll see in our studies that it's okay. It's going to get grassy, but there's forbs are still in there. As Shawn talked about, there's a need to get post-construction to get vegetation growing. We have nurse crop. Got some information, you know, from the metro parks. Don't, you know, with the annual rye, we were seeing the same thing where annual rye just isn't a good fit. And again, a lot of opinions, and I think coming out of all these studies, we're starting to see the strong performers and a pattern. One thing today, one of the things, you know, my takeaway in looking at all these studies cumulatively was our mixes are a good place to start, and it's kind of like the base of getting these sites to be better than when we found it. AEP, by the way, uses two mixes of slope stability and a forbs mix. The slope stability is, of course, logically grassier, more grasses, and we use that, of course, with the hydroseeding and where we want, you know, the ground to stay in place. Again, the costs have gone up a little bit over the years, but it's not too bad. If I have one mix that has a lot of good stuff in it, maybe like 27 different species, and it gets on the high end, but we're doing that next to a bike path in Hilliard in Ohio. The things that we've learned, you know, there was a lot of heroics in the beginning of what should we put down, and again, the annual rye, well, you know, we've tossed that. But I think some of the things we use in our species, our mixes that come up early and are strong performers are kind of the cover crop or the nurse crop. These will cycle out. Partridge Peak technically, you know, is a annual, but it's a very strong reseeder. So I guess what we've learned is, even though there was a lot of discussions, we'll keep it positive. A lot of discussions on what to put the seed mix in. But I think if you have a site that has the potential for a lot of native vegetation to pop out, come through, what's better than taking advantage of free seed? This area here was pretty well populated with deer tongue before we started, and boy, it's really come back as other species kind of go away. The one thing with our seed mixes, they were all successful. This one I had some good stats to provide. 20, I think it was 23 species out of the 25 showed up at different times. And this is just a snapshot of when we did the monitoring of what was present. Another interesting results, this was in the monitoring that was across the states. We didn't do Oklahoma for a couple reasons, but strong information from Ohio and West Virginia. The one thing was interesting, we started to see, and then we were studying this further at Dawes, is, well, how does a woody species react? As you know, transmission lines, we can't have a conflict with trees. So if there's something we can plant that slows it down, helps us stretch out our O&M dollar, that all the better. The one thing we noticed in this particular study was the fact that in the control plot, which kind of had some natives in it, but it was not as strong as performing as our two robust native seed mixes, the woodies were a little taller. And again, the upland mix had a little more forbs than the slope stability mix, which was the three that were being compared. This was really good about soil erosion. We had a spot on our test plot that was starting to erode. There was discussion with the team, oh, we got to go out and reseed it. And it's like, no, let's see what happens. So the results of monitoring it was that it was self-healing, and the root structure was actually helping it. And then eventually it self-healed, and it's fine. Again, that erosion thing's tough, a tough thing to study. So I think it was a plus to have those couple patches of erosion in our project to see what happens. So with the learning about what we're doing with the trees and kind of doing it's not a force field, but kind of slowing down the growth. One thing we're learning is maybe the maintenance treatment would be spot spraying. Oh, and so we did a day with Davy and their different companies and our forestry transmission and looking at what we can do with using the drone. And a drone would be another way to spot spray. And again, it was a good day. We had a lot of questions. It was good discussion. The other treatment that might be more feasible would be mowing. I just wanted to put out there's 3 different types of mowing. There's actually the mowing, like the roadside mowing, the guy on the tractor. There's maintenance mowing, which is churning everything up. And then the conservation mow, which is what I think most people think of mowing. A lot of takeaways from this. Mowing is not required to get something started. It has benefits. But in the beginning, we were told, hey, if you can't mow, it's not going to work. But we've proven this wrong, that you don't need to mow to get a good native seed mix to start going. And again, we're studying now to see what happens when we do the maintenance mowing, what happens with the woodies. And they do come back in their as initial studies, they come back, and boy, they really come back. Hydroseeding again, wanted to highlight this. This was a really good study, good result. We had the different plots and all the treatments were successful. The medium treatment had a little bit more positive results with species richness and erosion prevention, but bang for the buck, you're still able to do something that has a little lower seed count and is more in line with what we normally use. As a result of this study, we did beef up, so it's a little more robust in the standard native seed mix in case the contractor gets out there and decides, hey, I want to hydroseed. Another reason for doing the hydroseeding is it's a place where you have slopes. That's sometimes the only method you have for install. Again, the other thing I want to share is don't blame the seed. Sometimes it's the guy using the equipment. And this is what happened with one of our contractors. He did not know how to hydroseed and he turned one of his trucks green. So we don't let him hydroseed anymore. Just kind of a summary here, different takeaways from all the studies. And I wanted to put out some questions. The one question is the native species impact on the tree seedlings. Is it we're seeing a slowness in growth? Is it the crowding with the roots? Is that it? The shading? More information and studies, of course, is needed on that. And of course, I really do want to thank EPRI, the Dawes Breed and Pheasants Forever Roundstone Native Seed Company, and the Davy companies. Working with Athens Conservancy and the Broughton Foundation has just been a great experience, and they definitely were helpful. And actually, Athens Conservancy and Broughton have helped even monitor post-construction. So that's actually a picture from my Broughton pollinator plot. But thank you for your patience, and I was very excited to be here today and talk about all the good things we've done at AEP.
Well, thanks, Amy, and Shawn. Really great, interesting presentations. We have a couple of questions in the chat that have come through. Looks like Shawn, and I guess I'll encourage people to put some more questions into the Q&A, and I'll be happy to read those off for Amy and Shawn to answer. Shawn, I think the first one's for you, and it says, what fescues are native? I was under the assumption that all fescues are native to Europe.
So good question. So there are a number of fescue species that are native to the Americas, but the one that I mentioned in the presentation is fine fescue, which we say fine fescue, but there's actually multiple species that fall under that group. But if you look at the hard fescues, such as fescue would be an example, Festica rubra. There are European variants and there are North American variants. And if you look this up on the USDA's plant database, you'll see that its native status is, it's both. It's native and it can be exotic. Now, of course, most of the cultivars that we purchase are genetics that have evolved from Europe. And so, there's absolutely no way that I can tell, whether a Festica rubra in the field is native or exotic. So we placed it over on the native graph, but every time I give the presentation, I say, well, when it comes to this one, it's really questionable because really it's probably predominantly exotic seed that was developed through breeding programs coming from European accessions. But we do have native hard fescues in the Americas as well.
Great, thank you. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in and I was trying to pre-read them. Amy, looks like the next question is for you, and it's a question about the grass to forb ratio mixes in your seed mixes. And the question is, what percent of grasses in the forb mix?
I did not have a chance to calculate the latest one I just got from Brownstone. Um, but it seems it 55 maybe percent of the forbs versus the grasses.
So it's still about 50, still about
Yeah,
50-50,
yeah.
close to it. Okay. I think Allison and Caroline, this next question's for you, and it's will the presentations be shared? And I think the answer to that is yes, but um, maybe they can confirm that. Looks
Yes,
like Al.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, this will
great.
be uploaded to our website and I'll be reaching out the follow-up email with the slides and the link to
Okay,
that.
okay, great. Okay, the next question is, um, and again, I think this is for Amy. How did you manage the annual weeds if you did not mow in the first year after seeding?
We just we just let it go. We just AEP just does not mow. We have a 5-year cycle, so it was fine. Actually, something funny. Actually, I don't know if you remember at Dawes, the very first year in the ag plots, it was covered with crabgrass. And after that, it just worked its way out. It just got overcrowded with the native species. It's just nature takes its course, not to have a cliche, but yeah,
Yep.
we did fine. It worked.
Okay, let me see. Um, okay, so I'm not entirely sure I understand this question, so this person may have to take themselves off mute. It's Diane, and this is for you, Amy. Have your pilot projects demonstrated that the long-term maintenance costs are indeed lower than BAU? I wasn't sure what BAU stood for.
To answer that, the lines that we did for the larger study, they have not cycled through for maintenance yet. So forestry has not been out there to do an evaluation of those lines. What we saw at Dawes was there weren't the woodies there to treat, which is, what forestry, of course, would be looking at. Um, so I don't have hard numbers yet, but I think the plots down in Clear Creek Metro Park, I think they're coming up on the cycle. And I've been reminding forestry to call me before they make any decisions out there.
Okay, so the next question, um, so the person is both saying fantastic presentations to both of you. They've really enjoyed them. Um, where can we access the previous presentations? Are there presentations on removal of invasives from right-of-ways and on preventing further spread of invasive species in the course of right-of-way vegetation management? So I don't know if either one of you have any information that you can share. I guess I can kind of tackle the first one. Amy and I have worked together on several of the presentations that she's referenced, and you can at least read the abstracts and the overviews of those studies. If you go to the EPRI website, you can find those, some of those studies that Amy was referencing. But I guess I'll open it up to either of you on invasive species management on right-of-ways. Any advice or recommendations for invasive species?
Well, I can comment on, what our DOT's policy is. And unfortunately for a long time, it's been a squeaky wheel gets the grease type policy. They do have a couple of noxious species that they go, automatically, and that's mainly kind of catering to the production agriculture crowd, and those are Johnson grass and Canada thistle. But when it comes to these truly invasive species, these exotic invasive species that are up and coming. We just had a huge hogweed scare in Virginia. That's an invader that causes horrible, horrible dermatitis on people who touch the plant, way, way worse than poison ivy. And there was a big news cycle about that. But they, they don't really they don't have an active program that identifies certain invaders and then goes through and tries to eradicate unless there are complaints about that. And in terms of publications, I really can't think of one to point other than just getting on Google and looking through various extension articles.
Amy,
Yeah,
anything to add?
that falls into our forestry group. Basically, I'm I'm not familiar with AEP's policies or anything on that, unfortunately.
Have either of you seen any long-term allelopathic effects from using oats as a cover crop?
I haven't seen that
Not
from
yet.
oats, but certainly from fine fescues, we did a study to develop a new sod product, which is basically a pollinator garden that you can just cut and remove as sod and relocate. And that worked out really well. That was just published in Agronomy Journal this last year. But what we found is we were using different plant species as the base species and then putting a variety of native forbs into that.
Mm-hmm.
And the two, I guess we could call them worst players were fine fescue, which was extremely allelopathic. It even kept out the naturally occurring weeds from the site, much less our native forbs, and also common yarrow, which itself is of course a native, but and we were, we wanted that rhizomatous knitting ability to get sod, but the yarrow over a couple 3 years just dominated and reduced overall biodiversity compared to, for example, a blend of native grasses, things like Indian grass and some things in the andropogon group. A blend of those tend to allow way more forbs come in compared to fine fescue and the yarrow.
All right. Do you guys have any recommendations for forbs or grasses that are less than 18 inches tall?
That's been something oh gosh, years ago we went to having a short mix and a tall mix because at our stations we want that lower vegetation. And then that's before, solar started kicking in. I do not have a short mix per se, unfortunately, but I think some of the seed companies like Ernst or Pheasants Forever have pulled together some mixes that might accommodate that height.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a mix either. I mean, if you think about grasses, you can certainly throw out a couple of species like buffalo grass or blue grama. I'm trying to think of some other examples that are readily available seed. I can't, even below 18 inches. I mean, partridge pea would be a candidate, but man, in some environments, partridge pea can get it can get up there almost waist high. So
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so the next question I can tackle. It's directed towards EPRI. Have you done similar studies comparing the effectiveness of right-of-way restoration using standard versus native seed mixes in other areas of the US? So we have been testing putting down turf versus native seed mixes. We've done some of that work with Amy. We've done some of that in the Southeast, in Georgia with the Southern Company. We've also worked with First Energy in West Virginia and Ameren in Illinois. I haven't had the opportunity to do any studies in the kind of the Southwest part of the country yet. So but we have done some studies more in the Midwest and Southeast. Um, we are starting to get a little close on time. And Allison, you just turn your camera on when you want me to stop asking questions. So let me see. Um, so Amy, I think, and Shawn, we can maybe do some rapid fire. So are herbicide
Uh-oh.
applications ever used as part of the pre-planning, for example, to kill invasives or prep the seed bed?
We've definitely done research on charcoal seeding, which is a method of planting with a no-till planter and then spraying a narrow 1.5 inch band of charcoal right over each of the planted rows. And that charcoal will deactivate pre-emergence herbicide. So that allows you to come right over the top of all of your native seed blends with a pre-emergence herbicide. And the herbicide will prevent all these annual grasses and other problems from coming in between those tiny little rows because the charcoal deactivates the herbicide right over your plants. We've done work on that, and we've done a lot of work on spot treating and trying to make extension bulletins on how to identify the types of plants that are receptive to spot treatment that's not going to hurt the forbs and others. Where to use like a basal application of glyphosate or other products, and getting into an established native bed with, again, residual herbicides applied, kind of a basal application. But this is all laborious, hand work for those types of, gaining selectivity through placement. But Amy, what are you guys using any herbicide in any of your plantings?
No, well, I think Dawes in the beginning, we did herbicide, to site prep, but for a construction site, no. We pull up the gravel, pull up the filter fabric or mats and sometimes they windrow the topsoil out and we put the topsoil back and off we go. No fertilizer, no site prep, except making sure we have good seed to ground contact.
Well, the DOT is more appreciative of that crabgrass when it prevents a DEQ fine of $10,000 than they are worried about that crabgrass slowing down the natives.
Okay, I see we're almost out of time. Allison's turned our camera on. You guys, thank you for all the questions. We didn't nearly get to all the questions, so we'll
Uh-oh.
have to try to follow up later and get the rest of you that had a question, get those answered.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ashley. And thank you again, Amy and Shawn. Wonderful presentation. I learned so much, and I'm sure that I can speak for everyone in the audience there. Yeah, so I know that we're just at about the top of the hour, but we did just have some quick last minute announcements before we wrap up. Um, so we have a invitation to take a survey. ROWHWG is working to develop an infrastructure land stewardship certification program potentially, and we're trying to gauge interest for that. So the certification would distinguish individuals who demonstrate the expertise to perform biodiversity-oriented vegetation management on energy and transportation lands. So if this is something that you might be interested in having on your tool set, invite you to take the survey and provide some feedback on how we might develop that program. Deadline is May 2nd. And then Rowing is also hosting 2 conferences this summer that we'd like to advertise. So the first is the North American Monarch Summit. This is going to be hosted with MJV, and we are going to have it in Minneapolis this June. So this conference will bring together monarch conservation advocates from across Canada, US, and Mexico. We have a ton of great sessions related to current monarch conservation efforts, research, and breakout sessions related to native seed strategies, conservation agreements, the ESA, and some really cool habitat focused field trips. So invite you to register. Sponsorship opportunities are also available for that. And our second conference is BNEAT, Biodiversity in Nature and Energy and Transportation. And this is going to be hosted in conjunction with the Utility Arborist Association, NiSource, and EPRI. It'll be this August in Chesterton, and this is going to be a rights-of-way focused conference where we discuss the benefits of biodiversity-oriented vegetation management on ROW. We'll have a lot of different sessions related to policy and sustainability and some cool field trips as well. And then we do have another upcoming webinar. So my colleagues Dan Salas and Catherine O'Reilly are going to be giving a presentation on nature-based risks, sustainability planning for the energy sector. That'll be on April 30th. And you can use the QR code there to register if that's something that you might be interested in learning more about. And that was everything for today. So thank you so much again for joining. Like I mentioned, this presentation was recorded. We'll be following up with that within the next day or two, sharing some slides, and hopefully we can answer some of those unanswered questions as well. And if you have any interest in our previous webinars, which do focus more on invasive species management on ROW, those are all going to be available on our resources library as well. We will have a post-webinar survey that should automatically generate when we close out, or if not, that will also be in the wrap-up email that we send out. So invite you to take the survey, provide any feedback, what you think went well, areas for improvement, or if you have any additional questions or topics you'd like to see covered in the future, please also feel free to mention them. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.